Almost everyone gets told to think for yourself, but almost no one ever gets taught how. We get taught what to think, what to believe, which side's good, which side's bad, but not what thinking actually is. We don't get told how beliefs fit together or how to evaluate any of the things we believe to see if they're true, false, right, wrong, or whatever else. And there's a reason for this. Well, there's a lot of reasons for this. But the main reason for this is that we are living in a peculiar era where from one person to the next, we can no longer agree on what truth is, with some people openly arguing that there is no such thing as truth at all. And we've been living in this era for a while. Back in 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche published the now famous line, "God is dead." But what's often left out of that story is that he wasn't celebrating. He was warning about exactly this problem. He was warning that as belief in God eroded, there was no shared foundation of truth ready to take its place. And into that vacuum would come nihilism, relativism, and ideas that relied on nothing beyond themselves, where ideas of power, rather than truth or whether they made sense at all, would become the measure of all things. People argue about a great many things that Nietzsche said, but when one looks over the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, and the ideas that are prevalent at the time, it's hard to say he was wrong about this. And the why of all this might not be obvious at first glance. Ooh, philosophy. But let's think it through. All right. So, if there is a such thing as God, then there is a such thing as truth, and therefore right and wrong. And if there is no God, but truth still exists, then right and wrong are still possible because truth is there to hold the line. However, if there is no such thing as God, and there is no such thing as truth out there, then I'm sorry, but right and wrong do not exist. Not pleasant to think about, but it checks out. Now, we can say things are right and wrong, sure, and we can feel very strongly about them, but without something that holds all of reality and all of our beliefs into one single coherent whole, something truth, then anyone can say that anything is as good as bad as anything else, and there's no way to prove them wrong. In other words, without some shared concept of truth, we not only have disagreements, we have no way of settling those disagreements. And the thing is, if we can no longer all agree that there is such thing as God, then to have truth, we need to have a theory that can explain everything everyone believes in a way that everyone can agree on, that can hold mind and reality together without appealing to anything beyond themselves. And here, 150 years after Nietzsche wrote those words, we still do not have such a theory. The goal of these talks is about rebuilding that shared foundation of truth, not so that everyone will magically agree with one another afterwards, but so that when we do disagree with each other, we can at least realize that we are all doing the same thing, and that conversation will not only become possible again, but also enjoyable. Now that goal might seem ambitious, but the heart of this is very simple. Think of something like the concept of zero, and how simple and obvious it is once it's been explained. Now try to unthink zero once you know about it. You can't do it. That's the level of simplicity and obviousness that we're going for. So in this talk, we're setting the stage, the problem of truth, how it was once fixed and then unfixed, and laying the foundations of something that can replace it. In future talks, we'll build on that theory into thought, language, and all the joys of thinking. But in this one is where everything is going to come into view. Third, these talks are not going to be about the current day political disputes. They're about the ideas behind all disputes and how to evaluate them. When politics does show up at the very end, because that's how Upton Sinclair did it to me at the end of the jungle, they're going to be about institutions and practices, not policies and prescriptions. Before we get started, 3 quick things. First, you do not need a background in philosophy for this. When we get to language, I'll cover the relation between clear language and clear thinking. But for now, just know that word wizardry is forbidden in these lands. Second, I'm still working out the best way to present these ideas. Right now, the goal is to keep them short enough where people who normally wouldn't listen to long talks on philosophy might actually listen, but long enough to do all of the ideas justice. And also, all these ideas are building off the work of others. Their names and their books and what they cover will be in the description. So if you want to do further research, they'll be there. And they're awesome. I also hope these talks bring words like virtuous, wise, thoughtful, prudent, and even awesome back into our dictionary. But that's part of the stretch goal. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so the problem with us and any of the things we believe being absolutely true is that we don't know everything. If this is true, which it is, how can we say that any of our beliefs, especially our moral beliefs and beliefs about the world, are absolutely 100% true? Well, we can't, because we don't know everything. So if you say that murder is wrong, and Carl says that murder is great, as Carl is wont to do, is there something you can point to that will prove 100% absolutely that murder is wrong? No, you can't, because you don't know everything. You might think that Carl is a silly Billy and could probably point to hundreds of reasons why murder should be considered wrong, but you still can't say with 100% certainty that murder is wrong. Because at the end of the day, it's you who doesn't know everything up against Carl, who also doesn't know everything. That situation allows for an almost unlimited level of craziness until it's resolved. And as absurd as it might seem, every single group of people has to deal with it at some point in order to have a functional society that is not built on violence. So now let's say that even though we don't know everything, there is something above or beyond this reality which is perfect, all-knowing, or is everything. Is there such thing as absolute truth then? Yes, there is. In a very real sense, God is truth. Or if you want to sound cool like Spinoza, you could say Deus sive veritas. And that's true whether or not this perfect, all-knowing thing communicates with us or not. If God does communicate with us and tells us what's right and wrong, how we should live our lives, or what's right or wrong in certain situations, then that's what's right or wrong, that's how we should live our lives, and that's how we should behave in those situations. But even if we're talking about Aristotle's unmoved mover, chilling out there in the heavens thinking about things, or Plato's forms being perfect in the heavens, or something like the Chinese concept of Tian providing a universal order, just their existence alone allows for things to be true, because they either are truth out there or they know truth. Both of these ideas allow for absolute truth while also providing the possibility for things like reward and punishment for actions during this life, how the world should be, or a plan for how things should unfold. If you take these ideas and put them back into our earlier problem, they fix them. If God does communicate with us, you can tell Carl that murder is wrong because God said so. If God doesn't communicate with us, you can tell him that murder is wrong because there are natural laws inherent to all mankind, which makes murder wrong. But neither of these solutions solve all problems forever. If God does communicate with us, we still have to decide what the words mean, who gets to decide that, and how to apply those to the current moment. If God does not communicate with us, we still have to determine what the truth out there is and which arguments about them are the best. And all along the way, we can kill each other over our differing interpretations and beliefs, live or let live, or go back and forth depending on the day of the week, or some combination thereof. And that's basically how most of human history worked, at least the last few thousand years. If you go almost anywhere in the world, chances are the person in charge is in charge because God says so, or they are somehow divine, and you will find a priest class who decides what the divine teachings or words mean, what's right and wrong, good and evil, how you should live your life, and so on. If you have your own ideas, chances are you got murdered. The key point is that almost everyone believed in truth. They just mostly believed that they had the right truth and everyone else had the wrong one. But over the last few centuries, that world began to crack. Natural science, political theories, and philosophy began to replace religion as the main source of truth. Divine right of kings faded. The power of priests slowly gave way to the power of scientists and political theorists. And people began trying to move morality from the world of revealed religion to one based in nature. Most people during these times still believed in God and in revealed religion. And for the first few centuries of this change, people repeatedly tried to stitch the new, this-worldly ideas onto old religious frameworks. But by Nietzsche's time, you had thinkers like Marx, Freud, and Nietzsche himself openly arguing that there was no God at all. And the thoughtful observer will note that once we remove the idea of God or a higher truth from the picture, it leaves us right back where we started, where we can no longer say things are right or wrong. And as unpleasant as these ideas might be, in order to get past them, we have to take them seriously. So if we leave out the idea of God, that leaves us with three options. One, truth is relative, meaning maybe there is no such thing as truth. Maybe each person has their own truth. Or maybe each group has their own truth. It's the same basic principle, but different manifestations. Two is that there is a such thing as truth out there, and this is how you find it or get closer to it. Or three, there is a truth so fundamental that it can explain not only itself, but all religious and non-religious beliefs. So option one is that truth is relative, and that comes in three forms. One, there is no such thing as truth. Two, everyone has their own truth. Or three, each group has their own truth. And once you accept that, it becomes a real choose-your-own-adventure because you can argue anything. Some, like Camus, argued that you should be noble despite the absurdity of it all. Others, like Schopenhauer, said you should see the futility and endure it, while most came to the conclusion that if there is no such thing as objective truth, then everything came down to who has the power to impose their truth on others. And the rules, they're fine if they benefit us or our particular group. But if they don't, there is nothing beyond will and force to prevent us from doing whatever it takes to replace those with our own. And once that's the case, we can lie, we can cheat, we can cross lines that others won't, and we can, without irony, call these actions just because they help us gain power. But if everything comes down to power, once we've taken power for ourselves, what's to stop any individual among us from taking power from everyone else? And even if we don't want the hassle, why wouldn't we do that before others do it to us? And once someone does take power, why should they allow dissenting opinions? Why allow anyone to think for themselves? And why let anyone get power enough to threaten their power and their version of truth? Well, they shouldn't. And according to option one, they would be exactly right not to. So on a personal level, option one is a choose-your-own-adventure, from Camus all the way to the Marquis de Sade. But on a political level, it ultimately leads to one person on the top and using their power to stay there. Even if the original claim was that it's for the group, someone will become the first among equals, and once they have that title and that power, they can redefine every rule, every word, every definition, and anything else they care to, because they now have the power to control truth. For those who claim otherwise, or would like to believe otherwise, think about it for a moment. If everything comes down to power, once someone has absolute power, who decides what truth is other than them? These ideas are everywhere today. They each have different words, they each have different groups, and all of them promise a brighter future at the end of the rainbow if only they get their way. But the ideas underlying all of them are ancient. You can find them everywhere 2,400 years ago, before the likes of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and revealed religion brought the ideas of a higher truth and God into the world. And it is no coincidence that they are advancing the moment those beliefs are retreating. For those 2,400-year-old references, you can see Tharsalabus of Miletus, who Herodotus recounted cut down all of the best before they could rise to challenge him. You can read, in Plato's Republic, Thrasymachus arguing that justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. Or, if you'd like a funnier version, you can read The Clouds by Aristophanes, where Aristophanes incorrectly labeled Socrates as a sophist, but nonetheless was able to convey the ideas present at the time. And you know what? As much as you might disagree with these people, if you accept the premise that there is no such thing as truth, it's really hard to argue that any of them are wrong. So that's option one. Let's move to something a little bit brighter in option two. Option two says that there is a such thing as truth out there, and gosh golly, this is how you figure out what it is. Here, at least, there is something out there to appeal to: logic, reason, evidence, experiments, and the acceptance that there is a physical world available to our senses, even though we might disagree whether or not it's a simulation or a devil's trick. So this is already a huge step up, and it makes it a lot easier for me to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So let's say, for example, if I want to know if the camera filming me right now is hot. Not in that way. Well, now that you talk about it. Okay, anyways. All right, so just reason alone. I'm looking at it, doesn't look hot, it's not drawing much power. There's no stickers or warning labels that would to avoid a lawsuit for me touching it, so probably not hot. So that's reason alone. All right, or I can use reason and evidence. So if I call a friend who knows a lot about cameras and ask them, is this camera hot or not? And they say no. Okay, reason and evidence both say it's not hot. Or I can do reason plus evidence and an experiment. And this is the original scientific theorem. You come up with a theory, you figure out a way to test the theory, you publish your test, your reason, your logic, all of that for other people to test themselves. So let's think of an experiment. Not hot. Reason, evidence, and experiment all say it's not hot. Able to put that out there, other people can check it for themselves. So all that works great for simple things, but let's say we wanted to test something horribly complex, like if a new drug works. Well, we obviously can't control for all the differences that exist between one person and the next. We're just not there yet technologically. So for that, we'd break out a tool like statistics. So with statistics, we could give 20 people a real drug, 20 people a fake drug that we tell them is the real drug, and then we'll see how it goes. If during that time, 10 of the 20 people on the real drug came out with a disease that normally only affects 1 in 20 million people, we can safely say that it was the drug. And then in more less clear places, like say it was 1 in 20, we could dig into why and use statistics and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, statistical analysis would bear out is how we're making the decision rather than a real experiment. So we can't prove things the same way we could with an experiment, but we can at least put out our statistics, put out our experiment, put out our reason, and then people who disagree can come up with their own experiments and their own statistics to check against. So at least it's out there and people are able to check. All these tools, reason, evidence, experiments, and statistics largely built the modern world. They aren't perfect because people aren't perfect, but for our purposes, they're not enough because they cannot explain everything. They cannot explain what reason is. They cannot explain how thought works. They cannot explain themselves. They return results, not truth. So without something that can tie all of reality into a single unified whole, we still can't tell people that killing people is wrong. They can just reply, "Where is the truth that says this? Show me the truth." And we can't point them to the truth. We can point them to theories, and then they can come up with theories that contradict our theories. That's why we need something bigger, a theory of theories, something that can explain all religious and non-religious beliefs, including everything from options 1 and 2, including itself. And that's what we'll turn to in option 3. Okay, option 3. So option 3 again is that there is a basic, undeniable truth that can explain everything, including everything in options 1 and 2. What the founders call it? Self-evident, I believe is the word. So to give a parallel before we begin to frame this properly, think about the atomic theory. So before the atomic theory, all physical objects were separate. Iron was iron, copper was copper, a rug was a rug, water was water. But after we discovered the atomic theory, we learned that all physical objects could be broken down and analyzed and understood as from the same building blocks. They were all basically different manifestations of the same thing. So that's what we're trying to do, except instead of with physical objects, we're trying to do it with all mental objects. Right now, our smallest units of mental objects are things like language, logic, signs, and symbols. But those are like the molecules. Those are not the atoms. We need to go just a little bit further down. Because once we find that most basic unit, the atom of thought, it will enable us to take any thought, our own or anyone else's, and break them down into their constituent parts and see if they make sense. And when we disagree, we can do more than just yell at each other. Having a shared framework will give us the ability to take both of our beliefs apart and examine them piece by piece to see why each of us believe the things that we do. And if we get that right, we solve the problem that we started with, the problem of truth. Okay, 3 claims. 1, every thought, statement, or plan of action is either an argument. By argument, I mean something stated or implied that can be evaluated as true, false, right, wrong, or anything else, or can be reduced to argument. 2, beliefs are arguments that a mind accepts as true at any given moment. And 3, what we call thinking is the mechanisms through which our minds test arguments or come up with new ones. These 3 statements, or arguments if you will, provide a complete theory of everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be as far as our beliefs and our understanding of the universe. That's mighty abstract and cryptic, so let's use some examples to bring it down to earth. So let's say that you say something is good and I say the same thing is bad. Those are both arguments. You're arguing it's good and I'm arguing it's bad. So that's interesting. Now let's say you asked me why I believed it was bad, or I asked you why you believed it was good. When we responded, we would respond with arguments as to why it's good and why it's bad. So now let's say you wanted to go over there and Jenny said we should stay right here. When I asked you and Jenny why we should do those things, you would both respond with arguments as to why we should go over there or stay here, respectively. So now, let's say we were to ask someone if they believed in God, what they thought about right and wrong, if 2 plus 2 equals 4, or anything else we could imagine asking them about. Guess how they will always respond? Yeah, with arguments. And for each of these arguments, we can ask any question we can think to test them, and the person responding will always respond with, guess what? More arguments. Each of those arguments is true, and if you so desired, you could now test them in your own mind using the mechanism of thought. And this also captures all religious and non-religious beliefs. All religions say that there is something above or beyond this reality which is perfect, all-knowing, or is everything. That's an argument. Then to prove that argument, they offer up scriptures, holy books, or teachings that are divine or semi-divine. Then, having hopefully proven that argument, they go on to use those semi-divine or divine teachings to say that there is a such thing as right and wrong, that there are better and worse ways to live your life, or that you should behave in certain situations in certain ways. And all non-religious theories work the same way. They argue that something is true, false, right, wrong, or whatever, provide arguments as to why it is those things, and then build on those things, being whatever they said they are, to produce other things. You can look at any philosophy, any scientific theory, or anything you care to. That is the game that they're playing. And if we see each point along the way as arguments instead of whatever we're seeing them as, it makes things a lot easier. You're able to see, oh, this relies on this argument and this relies on that argument, so how do I test this argument? And come up with ways to do so. This is as good of a point as any to stop the video for a minute and think about these things. So think about anything you believe. Is it an argument? Yeah. Now ask yourself why you believe that thing. Is that not an argument? And go all the way down the line. It's just arguments and arguments and arguments. And then think of ways you might test those arguments to see if they're true. Or ask yourself if it even matters. I mean, if something makes you happy to believe and it's not harming anyone else, is that a bad thing? These are the kind of things you can think about. So I hope at this point we've lived up to the hype that I started with about the concept of zero and how you can't unsee it once you see it. Maybe it'll take a bit to click. Don't stress yourself over it. But the other fun thing about this is that everything that is an argument is logically true. So if you think about everything being an argument, that's an argument. But if you were to come up with some, claim against everything being an argument, that would be an argument trying to disprove that everything is an argument with an argument. It makes the brain hurt. But in any case, yeah, logically all of this holds up as well. And guess what? We just did the same thing that all of those non-religious and religious beliefs do. We argued something is true, we gave arguments as to why it is true, and now that we've established it as true, hopefully, we can build upon it to explain all manner of other things like logic, language, thinking, beliefs, and so on and so forth. Because if everything is an argument, the argument that everything is an argument is also an argument. There's no escaping the game. So with this truth in hand, we can finally go to Carl and say, okay, Carl, you'll stick in the mud. We still don't know everything, but we do know that everything is an argument. So what is your best argument as to why you should be allowed to murder people? And then we'll hear him out. All the arguments he can make as to why he should be allowed to murder people. And afterwards, we can list all the very many reasons why we think he's a silly Billy and should not be allowed to murder people. Now, on the face of this might seem absurd and like a waste of time. But if you think about it, chances are we will cover a lot of interesting topics. Like, for example, are there times when violence is okay? Like, for example, in self-defense. Should the intention of the person committing violence be taken into account? Should laws apply to everyone? And if they don't, what would happen in a society to the people who the laws don't apply to versus the ones they do? How much resentment will that build? And so on and so forth. We can even get into what is the purpose of law in the first place? All of these things are very important. And if you think about it, what we just described is exactly how law works, at least the way it has for at least the last few hundred years of common law. I don't know about you other law systems, but that's exactly how it worked. People come up with arguments as to why this, why that. People refute those arguments. People come up with new arguments. They question things, and things change. And then, having left sweet, gentle Carl, we can go to the people in option 1, the nihilists and the relativists, who say that there is no such thing as truth or everyone has their own truth, and present them with the idea that everything is an argument, which hopefully alone will get them to relent, because it is true. But if they persist, we can go and use all the tools in option 2's tool bag to try to refute their arguments. Like, for example, is 2 plus 2 equals 4 true? Yeah. And then we can go through their moral claims. Like, for example, murder being wrong. It's illegal in every society ever to murder people. Or we can look at things like cannibalism. Because cannibalism, yeah, that strikes us as wrong. But if you look at any society that does it, they never just go around chomping. They always have to do it tastefully. Couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. But no, seriously, every society that had cannibalism, there were rules. You had to do all these special ceremonies. It was only during this time. It was only these people, such and such and such. So yeah, we can keep going. We can go for days and days. But now that we know that everything is an argument, we can at least evaluate each argument along the way for everything that we say. So truth is back. Huzzah. Option 1, hopefully gone. And then, having left the nihilists and the relativists, we can apply this to everything else. Because every single thing that you, I, or anyone else believes is an argument. Every assumption we make along the way to those beliefs is an argument. And each and every one of them can be evaluated as such. But that's a problem for future talks. We'll go through language, how minds work, how to evaluate arguments, and then close with thoughts on how to incorporate these ideas into our political systems to hopefully get us through this era of nihilism and factionalism and into a new one where truth and whether or not ideas actually will work will rule the day. But this talk was about the problem of truth, how we got into the mess that we are currently in, and laying out a new theory of mind and reality that can explain all religious and non-religious beliefs without relying on anything beyond itself. And I hope we've done that with very convincing arguments. Thank you so much for listening. Okay, that's the end of the official video. This will be a more relaxed talky talk. I hope these talks really made you think. And one of the main things I hope to get across in here is the importance of humility, of realizing how much we don't know and how much we haven't thought about the things we believe. You know, whatever. It's true for all of us. It's true for me. It really, really hit home when I started thinking about this. And also, next talk, we're going to get into empathy, as being able to understand other people from a fundamental level, rather than thinking of them as, you know, all these psychological terms. We're going to be building upon this theory to show that people do the things they do because they believe things. And if they quit believing those things, or they believe new things, they'll do new things. It's revolutionary and crazy. But yeah. Okay. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening. Please let me know if the things that I said made sense. I hope I didn't get into any of the partisan stuff of the day. I don't care. And yeah, we'll do the next one. All right. Thank you so much.